Hey everyone, Thyworm here with a video on how to assess if a build or build guide is suitable for solo self-found. I will talk about several examples, give you pointers, things to look out for, and my own league starter for Settlers of Kalguur. Because a build, and particularly a league start, must carry you throughout the first few weeks of the new league, it's a very impactful choice. On the other hand, it is not the end of the world either if your character turns out to be stuck in tier 12 maps. Those can be farmed as well, you can collect some decent gear, let people in the meantime figure out what is actually broken, and reroll a new character that is completely meta and OP. I am never too worried about it personally. I just focus on something else instead, like building your city. But if your character isn't stuck in tier 12, let's say, but in a respec at level 68, either you or the build guide messed up, and we're talking about something else entirely. With that said, let's look at several factors I consider when picking a league starter. First, I'll look at what the purpose is of the build. In solo self-found, the purpose should almost always be mapping for a league starter. You will be in maps 95% of the time. If then a boss takes 2 minutes longer to kill, so be it. I also take the league mechanic into account and make an educated guess where the league mechanic typically takes place. In Settlers of Kalguur, the map will provide you with nodes that provide resources to use in the town, plus gold drops from monsters, and monsters are mostly found in maps. A mapping focused build seems to make the most sense, so I will be looking for a build with decent clear. Everyone has a preference when it comes to playstyle. Some people like minion builds, others like bow builds, and rejoice to those who like melee builds. I do feel that way too many people get laser focused on wanting to play a specific build in a game that offers hundreds of options and are severely limiting themselves, especially in solo self-found. A solo self-found league starter, in my opinion, should be a meta build unless you are an advanced player, because you must compensate for the fact that you can't trade, so you need something that is inherently strong and viable. And what is inherently strong and viable differs per league. Sometimes minions are strong, sometimes bows are strong, sometimes retaliation skills seem broken. If you're willing to adapt and not limit yourself to, let's say, only bow builds, you will have a much easier time. And you might discover you're enjoying other playstyles as well. Another part of the playstyle is the number of buttons you need to press. This league, a slam build with 6 exerted attacks and 3 war cries may be strong, but you will likely be forced to press 4 buttons before you attack. That is definitely not for everyone. And it surely isn't for me. I want 1 button builds to save my sanity and my wrists. I am willing to manually curse and use movement skills, but that is about it. Closely related to the number of buttons to press is clunkiness. Some builds, like those slam builds, are clunky to play. They're not smooth like a lightning arrow with returning projectiles. I personally am willing to play squishier builds if they're smooth in their playstyle. And I don't mean fast per se. I don't need a build to be super fast and zoomy, but it should be smooth. I'm also looking at who is creating the build. There are very few SSF build creators, which is a shame. There are way too many build creators, which is also a shame, that are not SSF, because there's a lot of crap out there. Some undisputed, prolific build creators that I have relied on for many years are the builds from Crouching Tuna, Pelstron, Rutu, and Jungroan. These guys absolutely know what they're talking about, they're playing their own builds time and time again, they're always honest about what is good at and what it is not good at, they're not trying to sell you on any builds with clickbaity titles, it is just straight up information, take it or leave it. If Jungroan says a build is SSF viable, it is, because he's been racing with that build and cleared 4 void stones in 12 hours using power siphon locust mines. If you can do that, it is definitely viable as an SSF league starter. Pelstron recently released a video on a Lightning Strike Warden build, and he's clear about this build being untested. And as an SSF player, when someone says untested, it means you don't start with that shit. You only play tried and proven builds in SSF as a league starter, or you may end up having a terrible time. Builds can be easily salvaged in trade, but in SSF you are possibly in for a horrible time if Pelstron made an oversight in his analysis, or a node is bugged, or what have you. Then you have creators who are known for primarily one type of build. Box for Righteous Fire is an obvious example, and he plays SSF too, so Righteous Fire Chieftain this league is a very safe choice in solo self-found. Typically though, in my experience, creators tend to play trade, and their builds may simply not be viable as an SSF league starter despite them claiming it is. There's the website Maxroll, which has plenty of league starter builds, but a decent number of those aren't really viable either for SSF. We will talk about why in the red flag section. And then there's the rest, in all honesty. I am very wary of basically anyone else creating builds, no matter how popular they are, because they either aren't really known for creating builds to begin with, or they don't play SSF that much, or I played a build of them before, which sucked, or I get the feeling they're trying to sell me on a build which is a wrong mindset in my humble opinion. Another reason to be wary is if someone needs to make apology videos regarding builds, or additional videos trying to prove why a build is in fact good. That is a bad sign to me. You should be confident in your builds and not be deterred by criticism. Another bad sign to me is if someone puts out like 5 league starters, because honestly, how much testing at that point and how much time and dedication went into that. PoE isn't the sort of game where something that worked 2 leagues ago still works today per se, and small changes in a game mechanic can have huge consequences on the build or its playability. It is hard enough to put out one decent league starter in the time between patch notes and a league start. I don't really trust people that put out much more than that. Let's talk about red flags in builds. The first major red flag in a build is the build relying on a unique item to work. Popcorn SSF relying on the Tafukai. In SSF, there's no guarantee you're going to find any specific unique in the first week, let's say, no matter how common that unique is. A Karui's Ward, super common, level 5 amulet or something, but it can simply not drop for you. If for whatever reason your build relies on it, you're screwed. Similarly, if there's no direct reliance on uniques, but the build has 3 or 4 uniques in early maps, it's also a red flag, because builds are created around a certain synergy. Unique items often provide unique affixes. Multiple unique affixes synergizing with each other can result in a great build, but missing one piece in that synergy can make the build feel a lot worse, which creators don't always anticipate. A last point about uniques, they are always in certain tiers. You may have heard the phrase a tier 1 unique or a tier 3 unique. This tier refers to their drop rate, with a tier 0 unique basically never ever dropping and a tier 5 unique being very common. GGG likes to change the tiers of uniques from time to time, which is another issue because uniques that are tier 5 last league may become tier 3 this league. Yet another reason why relying on uniques isn't a great idea. Sometimes people counter this argument with the fact that there are divination cards. And there are divination cards. Normally it is a fair point, you can target farm divination cards for uniques. But in Settlers of Kalguur, the drop rates and even the availability of those divination cards is shuffled throughout several maps. We have no clue where these things will be. Don't rely on them. It is a bad idea in SSF in 3.25. Second red flag, cluster jewels. Cluster jewels are notoriously difficult to roll in SSF, no matter what this build creator is telling you. First, you need to find the correct cluster jewel, which means you need to do Delirium. Delirium really doesn't drop all that many cluster jewels to begin with. Then, you need to craft them, which often requires quite some crafting currency, whether it is Harvest Life Force or Alteration Orbs or Chaos Orbs. Chances of you having all that currency in a league start scenario are rather slim. I'm looking for builds that have a level 95 skill tree without cluster jewels. And for the record, I'm not against putting items or gems in builds that are a bit harder to obtain. I have played Cast on Crit Detonate Dead Inquisitor last league as a league starter, which required 2 transfigured gems, for which I farmed the lab for half a day. But I do feel that is a little different, because you can always just enter the lab and you know you'll get it eventually, and there's no additional costs involved in terms of currency. That's very different when it comes to crafting certain items or finding uniques. Third red flag, massive Respeccs. Respecking in SSF is difficult because of the regret orbs required. This league you can use gold, but I don't want to use gold for Respeccs, I want to use gold for city building. Next to this, Respeccs often come with using different skills, sometimes a different playstyle even. And the later level the Respect occurs, like with Lightning Strike, the worse it gets in my opinion. The opportunity for human error when it comes to swapping, especially if you're unfamiliar with the build, is pretty massive. Ideally, I play a build that either has a small respec fairly early on, or a build that just levels using the skills it uses in endgame, like SRS Guardian a few leagues ago. Fourth red flag, builds using more skill points than you get at level 95. It's going to take you a long time to reach level 95 and to get all those skill points, and leveling to higher levels is fairly unrealistic for most people. If that POB counter is above 118, it is a red flag for me. Red flag number 5, too much DPS. I tend to believe anything that is below 10 million DPS as a league starter. If it gets above that, I disregard the build entirely unless it is from the build creators I mentioned before. I am willing to believe a build does 10 million DPS on day 2 if there's a good explanation for it, but often there isn't a good explanation for it and someone is, like I said before, simply trying to sell you on a build. Red flag number 6, untested builds. This league, there's no way I am league starting with a Warden or a Retaliation skill. Literally no one knows how any of those builds will perform. It is all paperwork, it is all theory, and it is a big liability. Plus, we all know that GGG isn't testing it either, so it comes down to the community. Don't play untested builds, guys. Do yourself a favor in SSF. Make that your second character once the bugs are fixed, not your first. This all comes down to builds being much harder to fix in SSF than in trade, plus if you're starting with a Warden like Pelstron is, and for whatever reason it doesn't work out, you're also reliant on Pelstron to fix that build for you basically, and depending on how he does that, that is either viable in SSF or it's not. The more experienced you are with the game, the more risks you can take, and the less these red flags impact you. Let's apply the knowledge so far on some builds provided by Maxroll. It's just a good resource and this is a good exercise. Starting with the Frostblink Elementalist. SSF isn't mentioned in the strengths and weaknesses. Looking at the gear, there's 4 uniques in there. The playstyle is quite niche, there's a respec at level 32. I wouldn't attempt this as my league starter, personally. Wave of Conviction Elementalist is stated as being SSF friendly, so let's have a look. There aren't too many uniques, and the ones that are there are common, like the Lightning Coil and the unique jewel Energized Armor. There's a late swap at level 60 to playing the skill, but the tree doesn't have a respec, so that's good. Progression to endgame looks doable as well in SSF. It won't clear tier 17 in late game according to its own notes, but if that's okay for you to play a build that doesn't really scale, you can give it a go. For me, I want the option to keep scaling a build, so I am passing on this one. Then, the Chaos Poison Zoomancer and Minion Army Necromancer, which has an SSF friendly tag. Looking at the gear with 4 uniques, including the Covenant, this is far from SSF friendly, but let's not give up just yet. I have found one of the Covenants, in probably 500 hours of mapping last league, so this thing is incredibly rare. You're not likely to ever get this item. Looking at the progression, however, there are decent substitutes. There's a very clear SSF friendly progression available towards the end game, and because it's minions it will most likely work, because minions basically always work. You can start with this. Archmage Ball Lightning states that it's bad in SSF. That is all we need to know. Moving on. Then, Hexblast Mind's Trickster doesn't state anything about SSF. Looking at the gear, it has several uniques. Mariline's Fallacy, the amulet, is somewhat rare. Sandstorm Visage, however, in SSF will be very hard to get this league. The item wasn't nerfed, but the drop rate is, plus you will need to run Sanctum. So you're reliant also on finding one of those tomes. It may require many Sanctum runs to get this item, so it is important the build functions without it. A Profane Proxy isn't the most common unique ring either. Profane Proxy comes relatively early in the progression towards endgame, and I know from experience that having it makes a build play a lot smoother. I think this is doable as an SSF league starter, but it is risky and I'm not gonna go for it. Maxroll at the time of writing this script doesn't have any additional updated build guides for 3.25. From the video of Zizren, the Lacerate Bleed Gladiator will be on there as well. I had a look at the POB and you're likely ending up with a rather tanky build that doesn't do a whole lot of damage but has plenty of scaling options, which is a pro for sure. Items seem very manageable as well, so I would imagine this is an SSF friendly character. And it would allow for a reroll later in the league towards something else, by which I mean something more melee. Let's finish with my own plans. I'm not going to risk playing melee at the start. Lightning strike builds will be amazing, no doubt, but leveling those is a hassle, and then a respec and crafting gear. It's a lot of stuff to worry about for a league starter, and I'd rather focus on other things. The max roll builds look good, but I played minions recently and I'm less interested in spellcasters. Plus, I want the ability to scale the build, as I will be playing hundreds of hours. So, unless Rutu or Jungroan comes along with something completely busted that I cannot pass up on, I am league starting with Righteous Fire Chieftain from Pox for multiple reasons. First, this guy has an entire website dedicated to the build with all the information you will ever need. Second, this is a tried and tested build in many different variations. Third, you can start playing RF from level 24 or something, so no respecs, just leveling with the skill and gradually improving it. That's just a feature of a build I thoroughly enjoy. Fourth, it can actually scale very well into the endgame, although at the start the DPS isn't amazing. Fifth, I own a Steam Deck and playing RF on a Steam Deck feels amazing, so I can also farm some maps on the couch this summer. And sixth, I want to wait a week while playing a solid build, potentially on a chair in the sun with the Steam Deck until people figure out how broken slams and other melee skills truly are. Then I'll wait a little bit longer until GGG puts down a nerf hammer, so no mid-league nerfs please. And then I will reroll into an OP melee character for my second build. In the meantime, I'll be figuring out the league mechanics, testing more scarabs and other strategies, collect some twink gear to make that second character progress super smoothly, already start collecting endgame gear for the new build, and of course provide you guys with daily updates on what I'm doing. That's the plan. It's not original, I know, but it is a solid choice. And that's it. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you're gonna start. Subscribe and like for more PoE SSF content. Thanks for watching and making it to the end. Love you all. See you soon. Bye bye.